Welcome to Anchored by the Word, a podcast ministry of Westlake Baptist Church in Moneta, Virginia. With your host, Pastor Justin Lyons.
Hello and welcome everyone to another edition of Anchored by the Word. I'm your host, Justin Likens, and my co-host, of course, is Diana. Good morning.
Good morning.
Well, it's the first full week of July, and I am already over summer.
Ditto.
You and I have dropped a considerable amount of weight, but I am still not built for 100-degree, 70% humidity days.
Me neither, but I think, man, how much worse would it have been?
That's a fair statement. So, honestly, the crazier thing for me to think about is we're already in July. Our kids only have a few weeks before they head back to school, whether college or middle school. And I hate to sound like the old guy here, even though I am, but the older I get, the faster the years seem to go. Now, I remember hearing my grandfather say that, and I'm like, it sounds crazy. That's old man talk. And now here I am saying it. So let me ask you, why is it that the older we get, it seems like the faster life goes?
Well, I think it's probably because when we're younger, we don't have as many cares and concerns and responsibilities as we do the older that we get. And so we're able to be a little bit more carefree in our days. But as we get older, the responsibilities of life, being responsible for paying bills and taking care of children and putting the work into marriage and all those things. And we can just allow ourselves to get so busy that there's more on our to do list than we could ever possibly accomplish. And so it feels like our days are powered by stress instead of by fun and enjoying the moments and making memories.
Okay, that's a fair statement. It's a better answer than I come up with, so that's what we're going to go with. Over the next couple of weeks, we want to talk about prayer, and we're going to approach it from a couple of different standpoints, so I hope it's going to be helpful. Today, we're going to look at what I would say is one of the most honest conversations recorded in all of the Bible. If you haven't read Psalm 44 recently, I want to encourage you, just pause the podcast right now and go read it. It's not that long, but it will kind of help you understand better what we're talking through. Um, as a little bit of background, we don't know who wrote this psalm, but it is a type of a psalm called a lament. And a lament in the Bible is a song or a prayer that's offered to God in the middle of suffering, grief, or a crisis. Now, we don't know when the psalm was authored, so we really don't know what was going on at the time that it was written. But my guess is we can all identify with what the psalmist is writing. And there's three movements in this psalm. So let's go ahead and start to break it down. So the opening 8 verses are what I would title God Gets All the Credit. The psalmist opens up by remembering and recounting all the ways that God has been with him and been with the nation of Israel. He is rehearsing and reminding their blessings. And when life is going well, a lot of times we don't mind praying and saying, Lord, thank you. But at the end of verse 8, we see a word that's used throughout the Psalms. It's the word Selah or Selah. The word is meant for a couple of reasons. The first one is it's a musical cue for the Psalms that were put to music. The music was about to change. Now, if the opening of the psalm was set to music, it'd be something upbeat and catchy. But it's about to take a turn. So think about music a little bit. What would the soundtrack of your life be?
I'm kind of thinking that it would be Veggie Tales.
Okay.
If you like to talk to tomatoes, if a squash can make you smile, if you like to waltz with potatoes up and down the produce aisle.
The funny thing is, that's true. Like, you will just randomly start singing and dancing at random times and places. So
I have danced in the grocery store, much to my children's chagrin.
that is a fair statement.
Actually, probably much more to my husband's chagrin.
That is most assuredly the case. You know, my soundtrack would be very simple. Da, 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 because just living in my head is a circus all by myself.
I think our theme songs go kinda well together.
They can. That's why we say marriage is finding your brand of crazy and committing to it for the rest of your life.
That's right.
So again, we're making a turn starting in verse 9. The second reason that the word Selah is used is it was meant to cause the reader to pause and to reflect. Don't read through the psalm so fast. Think deeply about what you just read. So as we get to verse 9, we go from God getting all the credit to now God getting all the blame. Whatever happened in the psalmist or the nation's life caused the psalmist to become very angry towards God. And we've talked about it before, but anger is actually a secondary emotion. The primary emotion typically behind anger is sadness.
Mhm.
It's understanding or feeling the impact of a loss of something. He starts saying things such as, "You've rejected us." The psalmist is actually going to charge God with not caring for him or not caring about his people. The psalmist suffers what's commonly referred to in the first responder world as a moral injury. And a moral injury happens when what you believe about life and the world around you doesn't match up with what's going on. We think about it and we hear it a lot of people going, I don't understand why life is this way. I go to church and I read my Bible, I do all of these things, and yet I'm suffering. Like there's all these things that are going on. That's what a moral injury is. And when we talk about it in the first responder law enforcement world, that actually takes out more than almost anything. But it also causes a lot of people to walk away from church and sometimes actually walk away from God because, again, what's happening in their life doesn't match up with what they believe about themselves or the world around them. The psalmist is talking about how God has turned his back on them. But the psalmist says, we haven't forgotten you. We haven't been false to your covenant. We haven't gone after false gods. In other words, he's saying, why do bad things happen to good people? Now, we're not going to deal with that today. But again, what happens when we're in the middle of suffering is we have a wrong view of God and we often have a wrong view of ourselves. This psalmist is basically saying, we haven't done anything to deserve this. Yet, if you were to read the Old Testament and the history of Israel, they haven't really been the most faithful people to God. And yet God has blessed them. God has preserved them. He has protected them. He has provided for them. But again, how often are we the exact same way? Let's be honest. Though we know it's the wrong question, we ask it a lot of times. We're trying to love and serve God and we find ourselves going through an incredibly difficult time or sometimes a prolonged season of suffering, and we feel like the suffering is an injustice. And when we suffer for injustice, somebody has to be to blame, and it's often God. Now, is our blame and our anger towards God rational? No, and we know it. But in the midst of pain and suffering, we are seldom rational. Think back to an incident that just happened in our family last week. Everybody's over. We're celebrating your mom's birthday, and actually, and everybody's having a great time. Like, but I've got my radio on, and I hear a call come out, and I really can't tell you why, but I ended up hearing all the details of this particular call and thinking, man, that sounds an awful lot like our son, Caleb. So as I'm listening and hearing more and more details, I jump on the radio and ask dispatch if they can confirm the ID of the person, and sure enough, it's our son. And his accelerator is stuck. I'm hearing that he's going about 50 miles an hour, and there's nothing that he's able to do to get his truck to stop. And I remember in that moment, all rational thought just left my head. Like I had a freak out moment because I'm listening to the radio, and in my mind, this isn't going to play out well. He's getting ready to come into the heart of town. There's going to be a lot of traffic. There's no way to stop a vehicle. And so you just thinking through all of that. And I know you heard Leia's reaction in that moment.
Right. As you let us know that Caleb was in danger, and we didn't know all of the details, but we knew that his gas pedal was stuck, and your mind can't think of any possible way that that could end well. So we heard that, and you were running out the door trying to get to him. And Catalea, as soon as she heard it, had burst out sobbing. And as you were running out the door, she just screamed, "No, don't take him." And when she screamed that, my legs gave out. I just collapsed in the floor. And the panic going through my heart and my mind was so real, because oftentimes you'll hear about a dangerous situation after it's over, but to be aware that your child is actively in danger and there is absolutely nothing that you can do to help them, uh, that has to be the worst feeling I have ever felt in my entire life. But what Catalea didn't even realize in that moment was she was praying. Now, did she have the first part of Psalm 44 down? She didn't. She didn't start off, "Dear Lord, thank you for all the ways you've watched out for us in the past." No, all her mind could form was a plea, "Don't take him."
Mm.
And if we're honest, when we are truly in the middle of a crisis, our mind doesn't immediately go to thankfulness for how God's worked out every other crisis we've faced in the past. It's focused on change this circumstance right now. And that's a genuine emotion.
Yeah, yeah. I think sometimes the most honest prayers are the ones that are offered extemporaneous, like hers. And it's not that we can approach God however we want, but in that moment, she was just crying out where her heart was. It was a plea of desperation, but also I would say a, a bit of trust in God, because she knew only God could protect him in that moment. And I remember as I'm grabbing my radio, I'm keying up, and I am running out the door. And then all of a sudden, as I get to my car, I hear he's got the car stopped. Again, I'm listening to everything in real time. Uh, I've never wanted to turn my radio off more than in that moment, but everything kind of changed once I heard that the truck is stopped. He's safe. He hadn't hit anything or anybody. Yeah, I was able to come back in and talk to you guys and go, hey, it's over. He's fine. But again, in those moments where we're panicking and our rational thought, leaves our mind, I'm taking off running out the door. By the time I could have gotten to him, it would have been over. Like there was nothing I could do, but in that moment, I needed to get to our son.
Right.
Um, so in the song, we see and we're reminded that when we're suffering or when we're hurting, our vision often gets blurry. We forget who God is, and we have a wrong view of ourselves. Again, the psalmist is saying, we haven't turned our backs on you. We haven't forsaken your covenant, yet you've turned your back on us. You've given us over to our enemies. Without saying these exact words, the psalmist accuses God of not loving them while they have been good little followers of God. Yeah, I mean, the audacity to say that, right? Like, when I was reading it, I'm like, wow, I cannot believe what I'm reading here. But here's the thought. I've been guilty of that.
Haven't we all?
The psalmist is denying their sinfulness while accusing God of acting unjustly. And it's because things aren't working out the way we think they should. So here's the question. How should we pray when we're hurting? And that's really the third movement of the psalm, and it's found actually in the last verse of the psalm. And I would summarize it this way. We need to learn to remember and rest. Go back to the first 8 verses of the psalm. Remind yourself of who God is and all that he has done for you. Pain and suffering have a way of giving us blessing amnesia. All we can see is the present pain, and it causes us to forget the faithfulness of God in the past. It causes us to forget who God is, even in the present.
It makes me think of a song, and you know me, I don't know the title, and I don't know who sings it, um, but the words say over and over, again and again, God is faithful. Over and over, again and again, through it all, He's made me able to stand and survive, to come through alive when it sure looked like I wouldn't win. Jesus is with me, so I'll claim the victory over and over again.
I think it's over again. I think it's Jeff and Sherry Easter, but don't hold me to
I was
that.
thinking maybe like the Crab Family or something.
It could be them as well. But again, one of the best things that we can do each day, because we never know how fast a day is going to turn, but we can remember the blessings, the promises, and the presence of God every day. And I think we should be in that habit. Back in February, we led the church to do 28 days of prayer. And we set out every 7 days was just a day of praise. We said every 7 days for that month, we are not going to ask God for a single thing. We are going to praise him for everything that he has done for us, for who he is and what he has given us.
And when you spend one day not asking for anything, but just every time you even have the inclination to ask for something, instead thank him for something, it really changes your mindset.
It does. I heard from several people in the church talking about, wow, that just really changed things for me. And there were a couple who admitted to struggling to doing that during February. And one person said, I just didn't do it. But then months later, they were like, okay, I got to try something different. Nothing's working. And so they tried a day of praise and they came back and were like, man, that changed everything. Even though honestly, what they were going through, it changed nothing but their mindset.
Perspective.
Yep. And that is huge. Remind yourself that God has been good to you, not just when you became a Christian. I think about where Jesus says in the Sermon on the Mount that God causes the rain to fall on the just and the unjust. There there is common grace. That is grace that God shows to everyone, but he provided for us and he protected us from his wrath because of our sin. Eh, Let's just be honest there. We deserved judgment. We deserve separation now and for all of eternity. And yet, what God did was draw us to himself to forgive us, save us, and adopt us into his family. He did what was necessary to save us. Remind yourself that God didn't have to save you, but in his grace, he did. So often, again, we have a low view of God and a high view of ourselves. Even though we don't say the words, we're like, well, of course God saved me. I'm a good person. Well, compared to who? We never compare ourselves to, somebody that does a lot of good things. We always compare ourselves to somebody that, like, yeah, that's a pretty messed up person right there. Why? Because we have an overinflated view of ourselves. We want to feel better about who we are. As David writes in Psalm 8, who is man that you are mindful of him? God didn't love us because we were lovable. He didn't save us because we were worthy. Romans 5 tells us that Christ died for us while we were yet sinners. It's not that we were good before Christ and he made us better. Man, that is such a false thing that we have in our minds. But what the Bible tells us in Ephesians 2 is we were dead and depraved and he made us alive. It's not that we came looking for God, but rather God came on a divine rescue mission. That's the core of the gospel, that he died for sinners to do what we could never do for ourselves, and he rose from the dead, proving that the Father accepted Jesus' sacrifice in our place and proving that he is sovereign over life and death. So we need to remember. I would encourage our audience, get in the habit one day a week. Just make it a day of praise. Find some of your favorite songs and sing them randomly throughout the day. But every time you're tempted to become overwhelmed or frustrated, angry, whatever, just take a moment and say thank you to the Lord for what he has done for you. And see what begins to happen in your heart, in your mind. See if that peace of God that Paul talks about in Philippians 4 doesn't begin to guard your heart and mind. The second thing I would say is rest in the person and work of Jesus. Jesus says in Matthew 11:28, all come unto me, all who are weary and heavy laden, and I will give you rest. So often in the middle of pain and suffering, we try to figure it out. We're asking, well, why is this happening? But we're also asking, how do I make it stop? This goes back to an episode 2 weeks ago when we talked about 2 Corinthians 12, verses 7 to 10. It reminds us that pain isn't something that we have to figure out. It's not a riddle to be solved. Asking, how do I make this stop, isn't the right question. How can I be faithful to God in the middle of it is a better question. Every difficulty that we experience is an invitation from God for us to trust him more. We can't trust our emotions. They lie to us. They're really good at lying to us. We've seen throughout Psalm 44 when he goes from praising God to blaming God. Think about how many times you've done that. How many times I've done that.
Isn't where is it in the Bible that it says that blessings and cursings come out of the same mouth, and it shouldn't be so?
That's going to be James, I want to say chapter 3, maybe 4 or 5,
Yeah.
but it's in the book of James. Uh, but this is also why I say it's good for us to keep a journal of our prayers. Now, make sure that in that prayer journal, you leave space to be able to write down how God answered that prayer. And make sure that you go back and actually write it down because we are prone to forget. especially in seasons of pain and suffering. You can write them down and go back to them from time to time. See how the last time you felt like God had abandoned you or a situation was going to break you. See how God was faithful to you. Nothing is going to strengthen you in the present like remembering God's faithfulness to you in the past. Now, none of this takes away the pain of the present situation, but it does allow us to reframe it. And so often that's what we need. In that moment of hearing the call about Caleb and his accelerator being stuck, and, in my mind, I'm thinking of all the things that could have happened.
Mhm.
He could have run into a ditch. He could have hit a guardrail. He could have hit somebody else. Because again, where he was driving, he was coming into a heavily populated area. And so all of these things are going through my mind, and I'm kind of embarrassed and ashamed to admit it, but not one time did it run through my mind that, hey, this truck is going to be stopped, everything's going to be fine, and everybody's going to be good.
Right.
My mind automatically went to worst case scenario.
Mine too.
And I don't think that we are alone in that situation. Some say, well, we're just trying to brace ourselves for what could happen. But, we always hear the saying that adversity builds character. And anybody that knows me knows I disagree with that statement. I don't think it builds your character. I think it actually reveals your character.
I agree.
I think when God allows us to go through suffering and difficulties and experience pain, it's actually a loving act of His grace to reveal where our trust in that moment is.
Yeah. You know, it brings to mind another song. I know you're
Shocker.
shocked. But and once again, I don't know the title or who sings it, but I think it's a newer song, and it's talking about, "If it was up to me, I'd take the easy road." I I would never experience the grace of God because if it was up to me, I'd never go through a hard time. Well, where do we grow in our faith? Do we grow in our faith when times are easy, or do we grow in our faith when our faith is tested?
So this one I know, simply because I listen to it a lot. It's Ben Fuller and Carrie Underwood. It's titled "If It's Up to Me." By the way, that entire album that Ben Fuller put out is absolutely fantastic. So you can go over to Amazon, Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen, and you can listen to a lot of those songs there. But I think about the caterpillar becoming a butterfly. They go into this cocoon, and how do they know they can fly, or how do their wings become strong enough so they can fly? Well, they have to keep pressing against the walls of that cocoon. And finally, when their wings are able to break that cocoon open, then their wings are strong enough for them to go and fly off. If they never had to press against the walls of that cocoon, they would never know the strength that they had been given.
Well, I kinda think about, like, as a parent, often we wanna take away the consequences for our kids. We wanna make their path an easy path, but can you imagine if you saw a cocoon and you went up and you opened it up for the caterpillar, would they be ready to fly at that point?
No.
No, but would they maybe have a false sense that they were? Probably, and it would probably lead to their death. Sometimes when we try to take away the consequences, we are not allowing them to grow and mature so that they can face whatever God has for them out in this world.
That is a great way to frame that. Um, I know that we've been kind of walking through some things and trying to figure some stuff out. And it's just one of those light bulb moments for me. So I appreciate that, even though it hurts. But again, we're not saying that by remembering and resting, it's going to take the pain away. We're not even saying that it's going to change the situation in and of itself right there, but it is going to help you to reframe it. And that's what we need. Because again, the question that we need to be asking isn't how can I make this stop, but rather how can I remain faithful to God through this? And I can promise you this, if you're trying to be faithful to God in your own strength, you're going to fail. But as you pray through the pain, as you read and praise God through the pain, you're going to be amazed at the strength that He gives you and the reminder that He is with you and that He is sovereign, that He is going to work all things for His glory and your good. And if nothing else, it's going to remind us of what Paul said there in 2 Corinthians 4, that this light momentary affliction is working for us an eternal weight of glory. So, yeah, the pain is temporary, but it is working something for our good for eternity. It's going to strengthen us in ways that we can't see in the moment. So, we're going to go ahead. We're going to wrap up the episode right here. We appreciate you guys hanging with us, but more than anything, we hope that this is going to help you, especially if you're finding yourself in a difficult season right now or you're hurting. We would say this: you're not alone. We understand it. Maybe what you need to do is save this episode and come back to it, because right now, life's going pretty good. You're kind of in the first 8 verses. That's awesome. Um, Maybe you know somebody that's struggling right now. We want to ask you, go ahead and share it with them. Hopefully, God can use it to encourage them and strengthen them in their walk with Him. If you need prayer, we want to invite you to reach out to us. We would love to be able to pray for you. If you want us to, we can keep it private, but you can reach out on Facebook or Instagram. You can send us private messages. Just go over to the pages. They're titled Anchored by the Word. Um, if you need to, you can even email it to us at anchoredbytheword@gmail.com. So just to let you in, next week, we're going to discuss a couple of different ways that we as Christians can learn to pray in a way that I think honors God and will help us to experience the blessing of answered prayer a little bit more. So we look forward to that conversation, and we hope you'll join us for it next week here on Anchored by the Word.
This has been Anchored by the Word. Copyright 2025 to Westlake Baptist Church, 2075 Scruggs Road, Moneta, Virginia.